the things you think about when your world is ending is pretty funny. You don't think about the grand speeches or the history books. You think about the small things. The weight of your daughter's head on your shoulder as she sleeps. The smell of your wife's hair when you hold her close. The taste of borscht on a cold winter evening. These are the things that make a life. These were the things that made my life. My name was Nikolai, and I was a patriot. In the year 1961, that word meant something. It was a shield, a purpose. Our great nation, Russia, was locked in a silent, tense dance with the Americans. We were building a new world, a better world, forged in the heart of the atom. And I was one of its architects. I was a nuclear physicist, working on a project so secret, so powerful, that its success would ensure the safety of our motherland for 1,000 years. I believed that. I poured my soul into my work, into the complex equations and the humming machinery, because I knew it was all for them, for my Anya and my little Svetlana. Every night, I would leave the cold, sterile embrace of the laboratory and return to the warmth of my small apartment, a world away from the silent, invisible power I worked with every day. The moment I walked through the door, the weight of the state, the pressure of the project, it all just melted away. There was only the sound of Svetlana's small feet running to greet me, her arms wrapping around my legs, and Anya's soft smile, a smile that could calm the most turbulent seas in my heart. We had a simple life, but it was a good life. It was a life I would have done anything to protect. This drive, this need to be a protector, it wasn't just born out of love. It was born out of fear. A deep, cold fear that had taken root in me when I was just a boy. I remember my grandmother. In her youth, she was a formidable woman, the pillar of our family. But time is a cruel thief. It stole her memories, one by one, leaving her confused and frightened in a world she no longer recognized. Dementia, they called it. I just called it a nightmare. I saw the way my aunts and uncles looked at her. Their eyes, once filled with love and respect, now held a cold, hard glint of impatience. She had become a burden. I'll never forget the day I overheard them in the kitchen, their voices low and conspiratorial. "What are we going to do with her?" my Uncle Dmitri had said, his voice laced with a weariness that bordered on cruelty. "She can't even remember our names. It's too much." They spoke of sending her away, of leaving her to wither in some state-run facility, a place where old people were sent to be forgotten. They wanted to abandon her, their own mother, the woman who had raised them. The thought was a dagger in my young heart. I saw her sitting in her chair by the window, a frail, lost soul, and I made myself a promise, a silent, solemn vow. I would never be like them. I would never turn my back on family. I would stand as a guardian, a shield against the cruelties of the world. My work, the atom, it was my way of fulfilling that vow. It was the power to protect my country, and by extension, my family. I was building a fortress around them with science, ensuring that no harm would ever come to them. I was so proud, so foolish. I never imagined that the very thing I believed was their salvation would become my damnation, that the shield I was forging would become the sword that would tear my world apart. The beast I worked with had no face. It had no voice. It was a silent, invisible god sleeping in a tomb of concrete and lead. We called it the core. It was the heart of our project, a seething, incandescent power that we prodded and measured, always careful, always respectful. We all knew the stories, the hushed whispers of accidents at other facilities, of men who got too close, who didn't show the proper respect.
Men who walked away feeling fine, only to fall apart from the inside out days later. The Geiger counters were our constant companions, their steady, rhythmic clicking, a sort of prayer, a mantra that kept the invisible monster at bay. We trusted our instruments, we trusted the lead-lined walls, we trusted our math, but deep down, there was always a hum of fear. It was the fear of the unknown, of a force that could unmake a man at a cellular level, turning his own body into his executioner. It was a modern-day demon, one we had summoned ourselves. I suppose I never truly let myself believe it could happen to me. I was meticulous, careful, I followed every protocol. I was a professional. The real fear, the one that kept me awake some nights, was something else. It was the fear of becoming my grandmother, not in mind, but in body. The thought of my own flesh betraying me, of becoming something grotesque, something my own family would recoil from in horror.
The day it happened started like any other. The air in the facility was thick with the usual smells of ozone and sterilized metal. We were running a series of calibration tests, pushing the reactor to a higher output than ever before. There was pressure from above, of course. The Americans were making progress, and we couldn't fall behind. The schedule was aggressive, and corners, I fear, were being cut in the name of progress. I was in the control room with my colleague, Dmitry, monitoring the feedback from the core. The low hum of the machinery was the facility's heartbeat, a sound so familiar it was almost comforting. Then it changed. A high-pitched whine began to emanate from the console, a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. A small red light began to flash, an insistent, angry pulse. "Coolant pressure fluctuation in sector gamma," Dmitry said, his voice tight. It was my sector. The protocols were clear. Initiate an immediate shutdown. But a shutdown would mean weeks of delays, endless reports, and questions from superiors who did not appreciate failure. "It's a sensor ghost," he said, a little too quickly. "It's happened before. Let's just recalibrate the flow." He was my senior, a man I respected. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the shutdown sequence. The alarm shrieked. "Nikolai, we don't have time. A manual valve adjustment will fix it. Go! I'll override the alarm from here." Against my better judgment, I went. The corridor leading to the reactor chamber was a long concrete tunnel, the air growing warmer with each step. The valve was in a small antechamber, separated from the core by a thick lead and plaster wall. As I entered the room, I felt it. A strange, prickling sensation on my skin, like 1,000 tiny needles. The air tasted metallic, coppery, like sucking on an old coin. And then I saw it. In the corner of my eye, a flash of the most brilliant, ethereal blue light, shimmering in the air for just a second before vanishing. It was the Cherenkov glow, the sign of raw, unshielded radiation. I froze. My blood turned to ice. I knew what it meant. A leak. A serious one. I threw my weight against the heavy valve, turning it with a strength I didn't know I possessed. The shrieking of the alarm back in the control room died down, replaced by the steady, familiar hum. It was over in less than a minute. I stumbled back into the control room, my heart hammering against my ribs. Dmitry was wiping sweat from his brow, a relieved smile on his face. "See? Just a sticky valve. Good work, Kolya." He clapped me on the shoulder. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him about the blue light, the taste in the air. But I couldn't. What would I say? That I imagined it? That I was panicking over nothing? We filed the report as a minor mechanical fault. A sticky valve. No mention of the alarm override. No mention of the blue light. no mention of the metallic taste that I couldn't get out of my mouth. I had walked into the dragon's lair, and I was terrified it had breathed its fire on me. That night, I went home and held my family tighter than ever before. I breathed in the scent of Anya's shampoo, the sweet, milky smell of Svetlana's fare. I tried to act normal. I told them my day was uneventful, just another day at the office. But I was a liar. I felt a strange internal vibration, a low-level hum beneath my skin that wouldn't go away. A headache began to throb behind my eyes. I told myself it was just stress, the adrenaline from the incident wearing off. But as I helped Anya with the dishes, I saw my reflection in the dark kitchen window. My face looked pale, waxy. My eyes seemed sunken, darker than usual. I was just tired, I told myself, exhausted. Later in the bathroom, I scrubbed my hands until they were raw, the soap and hot water doing nothing to wash away the feeling of invisible filth that clung to me. I looked at myself in the mirror, searching for any sign, any proof that my fear was just in my head. I looked the same, didn't I? I saw nothing, absolutely nothing, but I could feel it, a coolness spreading from my core, a deep cellular wrongness. It was a poison of the soul, and I knew with a certainty that defied all logic and reason that I had brought the beast home with me. It was inside me now, a silent passenger, waiting, and I was utterly, completely alone with my terror. A week went by. The headache faded, and the buzzing under my skin subsided. I began to convince myself I had imagined it all. The stress of the job, the pressure from our superiors, it was getting to me. I had overreacted. Life returned to its gentle, comforting rhythm. I played with Svetlana in the park, I held Anya's hand on our evening walks, and the fear began to recede, becoming a distant, half-forgotten nightmare. The incident at the lab was never spoken of again. The sticky valve was replaced, and the project moved forward. I was fine. I had to be fine. Then came the morning when it all began to unravel. I was in the bathroom, shaving. I was humming a little tune Anya liked. The warm water felt good on my skin. As I wiped the shaving cream from my jaw, I noticed it. A small red patch on my forearm, just below the elbow. It looked like a sunburn, but I hadn't been in the sun. It didn't hurt, but it itched. An insistent, maddening itch that I couldn't satisfy. I scratched at it absently, and then I looked down at my hand. A piece of my skin, about the size of a kopeck coin, had flaked off and was stuck to my fingertip. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Underneath, the flesh was raw, pink, and weeping a clear, oily fluid. There was no blood. The metallic taste of copper flooded my mouth, so strong that it made me gag. I dropped the razor. It clattered into the porcelain sink with a sound that seemed to echo in the silent apartment. I brought my finger closer to my face, my hand shaking uncontrollably. It was my skin, a piece of me. It was wet, translucent, and utterly alien. The humming in my body returned, louder this time, a symphony of decay. I looked from the sliver of flesh on my finger to the weeping sore on my arm, and then to my own terrified eyes in the mirror. This was it, the quiet beginning of the end. The beast was awake. It was hungry, and it was starting to eat.
I quickly hid my arm under my sleeve, my heart at frantic birth beating against my ribs. Anya was still sleeping. Svetlana was in her little bed, dreaming of whatever wonderful things 7-year-olds dream of. I couldn't let them see. Not yet.
I spent the day in a state of quiet, hyper-vigilant terror. At work, I wore long sleeves, a constant clammy pressure against the weeping lesion on my arm. Every few hours, I would lock myself in a washroom stall, my hands trembling as I unwrapped the crude bandage I'd fashioned from gauze and medical tape. The patch was growing. The redness had spread, and the center of the wound was now a deeper, angrier shade of crimson, like a sunset on a dying world. The skin around it was puffy and blistered, and the clear fluid continued to ooze through the gauze with an alarming speed. The smell was the worst part. It was a sweet, sickly odor, like rotting fruit mixed with something chemical, something sterile and wrong. It was the smell of my own body decomposing while I was still living in it. I would stare at my arm, at this grotesque blossoming of decay, and a cold, calm certainty would settle over me. This wasn't an infection. It wasn't a rash. This was the blue light. This was the metallic taste. This was the invisible fire I had walked through, and it was now burning me from the inside out. My mind, the logical, scientific mind that I had always trusted, was screaming at me. Radiation burn, acute exposure. But my heart, the terrified, desperate heart of a husband and a father, refused to listen. It couldn't be, because if it was, then my life as I knew it was over. And worse, much worse. I might have brought this curse, this invisible poison, into my home, into their lives.
Weeks passed. The test was a resounding success. The newspapers were filled with triumphant headlines, and Commander Volkov was decorated as a hero of the Soviet Union. I received a quiet commendation and a small bonus. I was a patriot who had done his part. But the fire I had walked through was now consuming me. My apartment, once a sanctuary of warmth and love, had become a living tomb, a sick room where I was the sole decaying patient. The man who shaved in the mirror every morning was a stranger, a grotesque parody of the person I once was. The radiation burns were no longer isolated patches. They were a roadmap of my ruin, covering my body in a quilt of weeping sores and blackened flesh. My skin, my own skin, was sloughing off in wet gelatinous sheets, revealing the raw muscle and sinew beneath. The smell, that sweet, sickly smell of my own decay, clung to everything. The furniture, the curtains, my wife's clothes. I could no longer hide it. I was a walking, breathing monument to my own failure, a horror show confined to our small two-room apartment. Anya and Svetlana were my unwilling audience. They tried, God, they tried. Anya would bring me food I couldn't eat, her hands shaking, her eyes never quite meeting mine. Svetlana, my little light, would stand in the doorway of my room, her small face a mixture of fear and a heartbreaking, childlike pity. She didn't run to me anymore. How could she? The arms that had once lifted her up to the sky were now raw, twisted things barely recognizable as human limbs. My face was a melting mask, my features slowly dissolving, my eyes milky white and sunken into the skeletal frame that was emerging from the ruins of my flesh. My deepest fear had come to life. I was my grandmother. I was the burden. I was the object of fear and disgust, the reason for the hushed, terrified whispers that now filled our home. I was being abandoned, not by being sent away, but by becoming something so monstrous that love itself could not bridge the gap.
One evening I was sitting in my chair, wrapped in blankets that did little to warm the profound cellular cold that had taken root in me. Anya was in the kitchen, her quiet sobs a constant tragic soundtrack to our lives. Svetlana crept into the room holding her small, worn teddy bear. She stood a few feet away, her eyes wide, with a terrible, innocent curiosity. In my mind, in the fading echo of the man I used to be, I was still her father, her protector. My love for her was the one thing the radiation hadn't been able to touch, the last pure thing in my rotting shell. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that her papa was still here. I tried to speak, but the sound that came out was a wet, gurgling rasp. I tried to smile, but the muscles in my face no longer obeyed. So I did the only thing I could. I tried to reach for her. I lifted my hand, a gesture that had once been a promise of comfort and safety. But the thing that rose from the blankets was not a hand. It was a grotesque, malformed claw of exposed bone and dripping flesh. I recoiled from my own body, a wave of self-loathing so powerful it almost stopped my heart. As I pulled my arm back, a piece of my forearm, a wet gray piece of what was once me, detached and fell. It was a small thing, but it fell with the weight of a dying star. It landed on Svetlana's cheek. She didn't scream. She just stood there, her eyes blinking, a look of confused surprise on her face. And then I saw it. The spot where my flesh had touched hers began to turn red, an angry, violent red. It was not a blush, it was a burn. Her perfect porcelain skin was blistering before my very eyes. The beast, the invisible fire that was consuming me, had passed through me. I had become its vessel. I had become the weapon. In my final, desperate act of love, I had poisoned my own child. The shield had not just failed, it had become the sword. I, her protector, was her destroyer. A sound finally tore from my throat, a sound of such utter despair and horror that it was no longer human. It was the sound of a damned soul realizing its own damnation.
I don't remember much after that. My world dissolved into a fever dream of pain and shadow. I was aware of hushed voices, of being carried on a stretcher, of the cold, sterile smell of a hospital. My last coherent thought was of Svetlana's face, of the red mark blossoming on her cheek. A few weeks after I was gone, after the fire inside me had finally consumed the last of what I was, Anya sat on a hard bench in a hospital corridor. Svetlana was in one room, our young son, Alexei, in another. They were both sick, a strange, wasting illness the doctors couldn't explain. A man in a crisp white coat, his face impassive and detached, approached her holding a clipboard. He didn't sit down. He spoke to her in a cold, clinical tone, his words precise and devoid of any human warmth. "We have the test results, Comrade Petrova." He said, "It is advanced radiation poisoning, systemic. There is significant cellular decay." Anya stared at him, not comprehending. The doctor continued, his voice unchanging. "Their bodies are failing from the inside out. I'm afraid there is nothing we can do. It will be slow." Anya looked from the doctor's cold eyes to the closed doors of her children's rooms, and she understood. She understood the sticky valve, the long hours, the commendation. She understood the smell that had clung to me, the way I had flinched from her touch. She understood the red mark on Svetlana's cheek. It was all a single, horrifying picture. The weight of it, the sheer, unimaginable cruelty of it broke her. She fell from the bench onto her knees on the cold, polished floor, a silent, guttural scream tearing from her throat, a sound that no one paid any attention to. My life's work, my solemn vow, born from the fear of seeing my grandmother abandoned, had come to its full, tragic circle. I had feared becoming a burden my family would want to leave behind. Instead, I became a contagion that ensured they could never leave, a poison that would follow them to their own slow, agonizing graves. My love was the weapon. My protection was the curse. And my greatest fear wasn't just realized, it was gifted. A final, horrific inheritance to the very people I had died trying to save.
Thank you so much for watching or listening. The things that go bump in the night are hungry for attention. By liking and subscribing, you're telling me you want more. You're helping me bring even more chilling tales and terrifying content to life.